Patience. All right. Thank you again, Circe, for inviting me to the York River and Small Coastal Basin Symposium on Narrative Science, and for all of you for attending today. So my colleague and I, Tom Allen at Old Dominion University, did a participatory mapping exercise with the Pamunkey Indian tribe in July of last year. So our purpose there was to see how sea level rise affected their relationship with the Pamunkey River, and what traditional ecological knowledge, which I'll be using TEK to refer to here forward, and TEK holders had to say about the potential solutions. All right. Of note, we didn't actually use the term TEK in the materials because it was redundant for the tribal members. So it was abbreviated to traditional knowledge. Because of COVID-19, our methods shifted from in-person oral history collection and a workshop, which intended to present an abbreviated SciTech process as used by Bethel in New Orleans, to a mail survey and an interactive web app deployed largely by the tribal liaison, Miss Lauren Fox, the former director of the Tribal Resource Center. We were, however, able to tour the reservation before restrictions started and received data from 9 of the 10 to 15 knowledge holders identified by the liaison as having multi-generational experience with the river. Our 6-word summary, linking the 3 research objectives, is mitigation preserves traditional assets before relocation. The supporting details will be provided from here forward. Each slide has quotes next to it with keywords printed in red. I won't read the quotes themselves, but I will indicate the relevance throughout the presentation. All right. So the image here provides reference for the study area and quotes that have to do with the options for sea level rise mitigation on the reservation. To give you an idea of the area, the reservation is a 1,100 acre peninsula at 16 feet elevation with 30 residences and about 90 residents that hosts gatherings of several hundred members each year. The river on which it sits is a tributary to the York River, which empties into the Chesapeake Bay. I want to share a little bit about the development of this feasibility assessment style project before going through the results. In working with the tribe on a NOAA Coastal Community Resilience Grant application on impediments to fish passage, we learned that usually universities and research centers approach the tribe with an idea and request their support. So the liaison was interested in flipping this narrative to have the tribe share its priorities and universities and research centers to support those as grant opportunities arose, such as those for hazard mitigation from FEMA and VDEM following Hurricanes Florence and Michael. This could increase the likelihood of the tribe contributing matching funds to grant applications themselves, which was a struggle in prior applications. In response to the tribe's funded NOAA grant on sturgeon, revealing issues associated with runoff and erosion, we leveraged our resources around the human-water relationship. We also collected a bit of related but separate information for the Virginia Department of Forestry at the request of the tribe. The liaison has since moved to a different career path, and her position was not set for immediate rehire. The potential for these priorities to gain traction moving forward depends on dissemination in hopes of revitalizing the dialogue and identifying if such a priority setting process is workable for other coastal tribes. Outlets such as the Symposium and the associated forums that you all put together, as well as the Hampton Roads Adaptation Forum that ODU puts together, offer avenues to improve lacking local integration experienced by the tribe. And I'll elaborate on what that means as we move forward. All Here's the railroad, which is the highest point and crosses the only access road into the reservation. The quotes here have to do with the effects of sea level rise. Some participants recounted seeing changes in the low tide line, increased marsh, fallen survey poles from the 1960s, and reduced yard along the river in their lifetimes. Even the young members of the tribe working in the resource center reported abandoning roads in their lifetime. There is some disagreement amongst participants regarding whether or not previous generations thought about adaptation and mitigation. But irrigation dishes were installed between farms hundreds of years ago. Despite intergenerational efforts and effects, some participants lamented that more should have been done. The traditional knowledge holders expected that flooding would get worse, restrict roadway use, cause additional erosion, and damage homes in the future. One participant thought that traction could be gained outside the reservation by mentioning the effects upon Powhatan's burial site. Several participants stated that future mitigation efforts should utilize traditional knowledge to identify appropriate trees and other plants to prevent erosion and identify land for relocation. Here we see a fishing hut that was removed to prevent erosion and quotes about the socioeconomic impacts of sea level rise. It is important to preserve values and traditions when selecting mitigation options, even if modern solutions are selected to protect other relevant resources, such as clay and fish. Recent mitigation implemented by the tribe with the support of university and governments included living shorelines, a bulkhead, and riprap. Participants suggested that high costs prevented expansion of these projects. For example, doing the full reservation in the living shoreline, according to Milligan et al.'s plan, would have cost over $1 million. But many of the participants thought that continuation was necessary. One participant perceived the impacts of existing projects to be insufficient for fish stocks. A participant proposed that protection should have been extended to the whole shoreline. They proposed focusing on recently eroded areas, homes, roads, graves, sacred sites, historic structures, wetlands, and the road in and out of the reservation. Recommendations ranged from walls that stopped 1 to 2 feet of flooding experienced today to structures capable of preventing it for generations to come. Raising homes, dredging, and wetland restoration were also recommended. Land use change in favor of organic farming and restoring traditional beaver and muskrat hunting practices were also proposed by a couple participants. Gray infrastructure was suggested more often than green options. All right. Viewing the future sea level and recurrent flooding risk for coastal Virginia maps of areas impacted by tidal nuisance flood events under NOAA's intermediate high scenarios in 2040, 2060, and 2080, seen here with the associated priority areas, lists, and quotes, shifted participants' focus onto people's homes or old ceremony grounds. Participants did view culturally relevant markers with these maps from Strickland et al.'s previous documentation, but those were removed from public presentations for privacy. Some participants stated that dates in the map helped them realize the extent of the problem and the need to work faster to address it. Most participants, again, suggested strategies to address vulnerabilities through structural mitigation, such as constructing bulkheads, floodgates, levees, and pump stations, as well as elevating roads, structures, and shorelines. Some strategies relied upon ecological functions to reduce flooding, such as introducing strategic vegetation and protecting wetlands. Participants' recommendations were still not without hesitation over modifications that could unintentionally affect water flow by shifting it elsewhere and causing ecological damage there, or interfere with wildlife breeding through ill-timed dredging or regrading. All right. This is one of the existing living shoreline projects. Here, the quotes show how timelines should be unique to the situation on the reservation. Internally, residence locations and governance were a concern. Land is not distributed in a way that protects new residents from flood risk. Some recent residents experienced flooded fields shortly after arrival. Without the support of the chief and council, community priorities cannot progress externally. As administrations change, so does the willingness to promote mitigation and adaptation efforts. Externally, a privately held railroad that may carry toxic cargo crosses the reservation, and river pollution from the upstream affects the reservation as well. Flooding around the railroad tracks has caused destabilization before that could result in derailment. The sheriff has to be called to temporarily block the tracks until the railroad company can re-stabilize it. Runoff was another perceived external threat. The runoff from the county dump and farming chemicals pollutes the river, and the reservation residents receive the highest level of pollution due to proximity and interaction with the river. Negotiations with the individual landowners and the municipality would be required to reduce pollution. Opportunities to acquire more traditional land and leverage the core population of Pamunkey citizens for implementation were paramount to successful adaptation, such as increasing financial resources and federal involvement. FEMA and the EPA were suggested for project funding, and the Department of Interior for land reclamation. Internally, forming a flood management and planning committee was a recommendation that could occur on the reservation, since they're not included in the county mitigation plans, except for a note that their fish hatchery is important. This is, however, a federally and state recognized tribe. And they have had success before, even before they were federally recognized, working with federal agencies to prevent a dam from going in just 3 miles upstream of the reservation. All right. This image is of riprap protecting a home near the shoreline. The text shows the action plan proposed to prepare, absorb, recover, and adapt to sea level rise per the resilience matrix provided to them from Allen et al.'s work in North Carolina. And the tribal liaison did agree that this was an appropriate metric for them to use. Traditional knowledge can inform the priorities to include and identify the extent, elements, and location of mitigation and adaptation. Once the expectations are set, action to protect, preserve, and relocate culturally and economically valuable assets can begin. Internal capacity, stakeholder involvement, and federal funds were identified as critical to progress through these stages from short to long-term goals. Of particular interest was the capacity to internally maintain mitigation structures and communicate risk. External support was of interest for relief and determining rebuilding and remediation options. Participants called for the inclusion of additional information in future map iterations to help advocate, including storm surge, current sea levels, elevation and depth data, projected erosion areas with the potential for uninhabitable marshland and wetland development, previously held territory, and simulations of what can stop the flooding. More information, internal communication, and external advocacy about flood risk and mitigation technology was desired in the form of not only maps, but also blueprints, trainings, and impact assessments. The inclination to not make recommendations outside of their expertise and align priorities with new technology is not unique to this tribe. It actually echoes the national and international findings of Bethel and Gomez-Begentham, respectively. All right, so here I show the model derived from this work that synthesizes coastal management influences on reservations. To return to the 6-word summary, mitigation preserves traditional assets before relocation. And I also have a recommendation here that local integration and prioritization could improve. The management influences identifies hazards associated by TEK holders with sea level rise. Considerations that need to be taken regarding the tribe's unique situation and how development patterns and political actors influence management options. All right. I would like to thank you for entertaining this qualitative research that you've seen here. I would also like to thank our funders, the Natural Hazard Center, which hosts the grant report, policy brief, and article link associated with this study on their website. And I look forward to taking any of your questions.